Thank you so much, everyone. It's such an honor to be here, and to Andrew for really empowering me, and so many others. I just wanted to say that, to kick things off here, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. My aunties in particular, I'd love to call out my Auntie Ina, who just passed this last year, and she was a massive part of the Native American rights movement in the late 60s, and she marched on the Capitol, and actually during the relocation that Andrew spoke of, my grandpa was relocated to Chicago, and Chicago, I've come back now after 15 years full circle and really laying roots here, but my Auntie Paula is currently our director of the tribal hospital on our reservation today, where my mom was born, and my mom's the kind of biggest inspiration of all. I'll get into it later with my nonprofit Natives Rising, but it was because of my grandmother's passing 2 years ago to really honor her legacy and my ancestors that I wanted to found that. And yeah, we've already spoken a bit about my background here as well, but I'll get into the company that I'm currently working on, Tiny Organics. Yeah, so I'm really excited to tell you about my entrepreneurial journey today. It's been a long time coming, and I know it was mentioned my last company that I built for about 8 years. WonderWoof was the product. It was for my first baby, my dog whiskey, a Fitbit for dogs before those existed. But the only way I got my start there was I got a $50K grant. To get things off the ground. And so, a lot of times when you're raising funding for a VC-backed company like Tiny as well, you need to do like a friends and family round, and most natives don't have, access to that. I'm the first to graduate college from my immediate family. And Tiny is like a culmination of, several companies kind of prior, but inspired by my son, Sebastian. This is not him. I realized I should have put a photo of him in here too. But, I'll get into it a little bit here. So it was born from a true vision around childhood development. When I looked at my upbringing, and it was just filled with so much love. We would travel from where I grew up in Mackinac, Illinois, very small countryside place, to the reservation, which Turtle Mountain Chippewa Reservation is 10 miles south of the Canadian border in North Dakota. It's about a 15-hour drive, and my parents had clocked every McDonald's along the way, and we'd wait and stop at all the McDonald's. And I thought this was a joke growing up, but my parents told me that my first words were McDonald Coke Fry, and I think it's true actually. and so I thought, okay, wait a minute, because then growing up I was like kind of on a sugar roller coaster, probably as most children and are. But when I was looking at the baby food system, it was like, okay, we were being fed these purees that were really jars of, actually back in the 80s, they were adding the sugar and salt to, right? So it'd be palatable to the parent as well. And then, it got into the pouches about a decade ago where children weren't able to build like that dexterity or the jaw development. And, I'm not saying any of these things are bad, of themselves, of course, but when you look at purees across the board, it's mainly fruit, and that's almost all sugar, even though it's natural. And so I thought, okay, what if a child could, because I re-engineered my body 18 years ago to be vegetarian, and I just thought, and I know those joys now of a plant-based diet, so I thought for my son, what if I could introduce vegetables to him first, right, as opposed to kind of the sugary purees. And so Tiny was born. We created this solution around finger foods first approach. And when we looked at the way the rest of the world ate, it's actually just real whole foods that babies take on. And a lot of times it's called baby-led weaning. Really, the Western worlds are the only ones that have kind of made it where everything has to be pureed to mush. And there was no need for that. And so over 80% of our cups are vegetable only out of the 100 first flavors that you introduce to your baby. And of course, everything's vegan and organic and all natural. But this is what I was just mentioning, and there's also this magical moment in a child's life, and I actually have a 4-week-old at home, so I'm sorry if I'm a bit rusty on presenting today. This is my first outing, but he'll be eating this way too, and at the age of 4 to 7 months, there's this thing called the flavor window, and it's this magical moment where in a whole lifetime, you're never more keen to experience new flavors than you are in this moment. So we thought if we could introduce vegetables, early and often in that way, could children be more keen for veggies later? My first son Sebastian's now 4 years old, and he does prefer vegetables. I do credit that to Tiny. So we have gotten some great publicity out of this. And again, this is like culmination of 15 years of entrepreneurship here to kind of get to the point. But when we got Michelle Obama's partnership in place, this was right before we launched. She wanted to do a campaign for her 10-year anniversary since founding Partnership for a Healthier America in the White House. She wanted to do a campaign around veggies early and often, and so her team reached out to Tiny, and we were so honored to be kind of at the forefront of that conversation. So I love this. Flavor is nature's shorthand for nutrition. I mean, this was just a really quick snapshot that I threw together of some of our cups, but you can see just in the colors themselves, right? But when you go back in our history, it was all about what was the real whole foods. And my cousin, Chef Corey Azure of the Turtle Mountain Chippewa tribe, he developed for us the first ever indigenous baby food recipe that we could find on the market, Three Sisters. And so we actually sourced all the ingredients from the reservation, and we were able to tell children that story around how these grow together and about our backgrounds as well, and give it back to the community. So for us, this was really important just to raise awareness, and that each cup is almost experiencing a different culture. And when we look at our history, and Corey always talks to me about this, but it was eating the real whole food, right? Not what my mom had grown up on, which was like the lard and the Spam and all of those. She didn't have milk, growing up and stuff. So I think that when we look at sort of redefining what it means to be Native in this next generation of kind of how do we take back our culture and claim it in that new way, kind of pre-colonialism, and so we really fired up about it, and again have kicked off Natives Rising, and I'll go into our co-founders because they're phenomenal and the reason that this exists. Danielle Forward actually created Natives Rising while she was still working in product at Facebook. This was about 5 years ago, but for Indigenous in tech. And then Hannah, who you'll also see, she was the executive director at ABLE, American Indigenous Business Leaders, and her dad wrote the book Native Entrepreneurs. And so her and I had joined forces about 2 years ago upon my grandma's death, and wanting to really build something for Native entrepreneurs to get their start with that kind of $50K grant the way that I did. And so when we met, we actually met Danielle through, it was an MIT Indigenous Women in STEM group, and we were able to say, wait a minute, we're kind of trying to do the same thing here, like, can we join forces? And that's how we came together, and this is the three of us here, but just phenomenal women getting to build this and really launching it now. There are some testimonials around all the things that Danielle's done the past 5 years for Indigenous in tech as well, but what we're really trying to do here is focus on the community support for Indigenous entrepreneurs, the inspiration around building that ecosystem that can empower each other. When I looked at the landscape, it was I can count on one hand the number of Natives who have raised venture capital, right? And I'm the only one that we can find that's raised a Series A. That has to change. Like, we're going to make that change, and that's part of what we're trying to do here. The visibility of, it's really hard to be what you can't see, and so lifting up Native voices in business, and then of course honoring our heritage as well. And Andrew talked about this so eloquently, so I'll just kind of, run through it a bit here. But, we have some of the highest poverty rates. Estimated that almost 27% of the lowest in the nation, right? The lack of role models is something that we just discussed. But when we look at we're trying to actually go to tribal colleges, beginning with mine. On my reservation, to figure out, how can we talk to kids, at university around, entrepreneurship and getting them more involved. But when we look across the board, it is pretty grim in terms of there's very few Native-owned businesses that have went down this road, right? When it comes to kind of the tech piece as well. So our hypothesis was if we expose Native people to role models in tech and entrepreneurship, we can give them the support they need, we can move the numbers of Indigenous poverty, and most importantly, we can instill that sense of pride and self-confidence. So this is a little bit more about the program itself. The fellowship program is for Indigenous in tech, and so we do have a pretty thriving Slack community of hundreds of natives that have joined on, and we get to host annual conference around, which I'll talk about in a minute, through all the great work Danielle's already done, and we're just kicking off on the entrepreneurship side with the Founders Circle, and as mentioned, wanting to implement these 50K scholarships that are grants. At that point, we would try to work. The bigger vision is to build a fund that is backed by Native Americans so that we're bringing that wealth back to our tribes. But we didn't want to start there because a lot of times you don't even know, like for me growing up, that, oh, you could raise money to build a business, right? We want to have that education in place first, and the grant really made sense there. But here's some of the testimonials I was mentioning, and one in particular that was really interesting that Danielle had found early on is that for Latinx, it's, you can kind of type in, okay, certain last names, try to find, recruit in terms of tech, or even getting, even finding Native entrepreneurs online. But it's really difficult to do that with Indigenous, right? A lot of us have names you would never, we're not using our Native names, you would never know. And so I think that's part of where we can help here, and where we found corporates getting very interested as well around partnering with us. But this just kind of speaks to, and the Natives Rising conference that we'd had, that basically people have went on to realize, like, okay, I can go and have these careers, and I want to go to college and pursue that and have the support. When we look at the market landscape, we're the only ones that would be doing this for Indigenous communities, in particular for the tech and the founder piece. And we have an incredible advisory council. It's the only reason we're here. And Tanya's put us in touch through SoftBank with just amazing legal counsel, and actually Genevieve introduced me to Hannah early on, and she's also Native. And then Samara is here in Chicago. I'm sure some of you have heard of her as the first Latina to raise an over $50 million fund as a sole GP, and she's been on my board the last 3 years, and just extremely supportive of everything we're doing. We're adding more and more folks to this now, but thank you so much, and here's my Natives Rising email. Thank you.